What's up, guys? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more of our videos. Also, make sure you follow us all over social media so you don't miss any of our content or show announcements. My number one big takeaway from the weekend: the Los Angeles Lakers have reinvented themselves as a staunch defensive team. This team has pretty much only had weird seasons ever since they made the decision to trade for Russell Westbrook, whether it's been like that first Russ year where it's a lot of injuries, or that second Russ year where it's more injuries, but then you're kind of a completely different team in the post-deadline phase of the season, to the quitting on Darvin Ham in the middle of the season for a month, to everything that went wrong in that late November, early December stretch this year. But this might actually be the weirdest thing that I've seen the Lakers do post-trading for Russell Westbrook. In the Lakers' first 23 games before this 4-1 stretch, they were 26th in defensive rating, meaning they allowed the 5th most points in the league per 100 possessions, 25th in defensive rebounding percentage, 27th in fast break points allowed. Meaning, basically, for the first 23 games of the season, for more than a fourth of the season, they were getting absolutely crushed in every athleticism category. Defending, rebounding, and running the floor. Those are all things that come down to your willingness to compete athletically on the floor. Bottom 6 in all three of those categories. In the Lakers' last 5 games, they are the number one defense in the league, allowing just 99.2 points per 100 possessions. They're the only team in the league allowing less than 100 points per 100 possessions in that span. They are 9th in defensive rebounding percentage and 10th in fast break points allowed. So from bottom 6 in all three categories to number 1 in defense and top 10 in all three categories. Most impressively, they've done it against teams that specifically attack their weaknesses. In this stretch of games, they've had to play their last 3 against Memphis and Sacramento. Those are all top 10 offenses predicated on speed, which is a weakness for the Lakers, right? And especially in transition, weaknesses for the Lakers. And they shut both offenses down and kept both teams out of transition. That's a Memphis Grizzlies team that's been kicking everybody's butt, and the Lakers kind of led them wire to wire. And it mostly comes down to the team rediscovering its competitive nature. Like, there are some schematic things that have changed. Max Christie is starting now, right? The Lakers have been more picky with their switching. Essentially, they're not just conceding guard switches unless it's necessary, meaning unless there's actually a good pick that is set. And then usually if there's an action between a guard and AD, instead of switching that action, which they had done in the past, they're having that guard chase over the top and AD's meeting them at the level, a more traditional pick and roll coverage. This has allowed Anthony Davis to be at the rim more frequently, which is important for protecting the rim and for defensive rebounding. One of the things with the Lakers, I'm actually generally a believer in switching as a scheme. I think it stagnates teams and baits them into a lot of bad basketball. But in order for switching to function, you need 5-man units that are generally pretty athletic across the board. The reason why is teams are going to attack switching by picking on mismatches and by doing damage on the offensive glass, right? So like you switch, you get a bad guard like D'Lo onto the ball and they're looking to attack, right? That's a mismatch. Or, okay, Anthony Davis switched the ball screen and now he's on their best guard, but now that guard is taking Anthony Davis away from the play and now you don't have rim protection or anybody that can clean up the defensive glass, right? Like the Lakers, in terms of their personnel, should be more picky with their switching. They have been more picky with their switching, and that has helped. Those things have certainly played a role, but by far the biggest change has just been in their competitive nature, right? Like a tweak like that's not the difference between the Lakers being one of the very worst defensive teams in the league and being the best defensive team in the league. That's not the kind of difference that'll come from that kind of change. That helps, but most of it comes down to they're just fighting. The NBA is like a never-ending onslaught of good basketball teams pitted against you. There's always just another one waiting, right? And you have to be ready to compete every night. The Lakers went through an extended stretch where they were literally not competing and they got rolled a bunch. There are 5 factors that I think have led to this turnaround for the Lakers. Number 1, embarrassment. The loss in Miami in particular was one of the low points of the LeBron AD era. I wasn't the only one being very critical of them. It was a pretty big story. Like, you guys spent all training camp passive aggressively shitting on Darvin Ham for him not being competent, and now you're openly quitting in the first quarter of an important game against a mediocre team in the Miami Heat and getting smacked by 40 for your 6th loss in 8 tries. That was embarrassing. Embarrassment is a natural motivator. Number 2, there is a trickle-down effect that comes from minor schematic changes when they lead to success. It's like momentum. We talked about it earlier. The switching wasn't a good fit for this particular roster, at least to do it as much as they had been doing. You make a tweak in your approach, suddenly you start getting more stops. You start getting more stops, players start to believe in the scheme more. Players start to believe in the scheme more, they start to buy in more. Suddenly you're getting even more effort, even more stops. Suddenly you start to win some games. Now it starts to believe, the roster starts to believe even more, and it can really turn into a momentous kind of thing, right? So there's no doubt that the schematic changes have led to some of the turnaround in the competitiveness of the Lakers. 3, several Lakers are just playing better basketball than they did to start the season. I talk about this concept all the time on the show, but sometimes the best solution for a struggling basketball team is guys just have to play better. You know? Like, it's crazy for the Milwaukee Bucks this year what happened when Giannis and Brook were just like, hey, what if you and I just go back to completely shutting teams down on defense? And what if that just snowballs into a bunch of good stuff for our team? And that's what happened, right? Same thing's happening for the Lakers. LeBron James, a big part of the 2-6 stretch was LeBron was terrible. He wasn't scoring much. He wasn't scoring very efficiently. He was turning the ball over too much, and he wasn't engaged defensively or on the glass. I think he got embarrassed by that whole thing. He took 10 days off, and when he came back, he just started playing super hard. This is something I talked about a lot during LeBron's slump. Those of you guys who followed the show during that time will remember this, but I talked about one of the best ways to get out of a slump is to build momentum and confidence by making winning plays. LeBron is still huge. LeBron is still fast. He's still an excellent NBA athlete with a ton of skill and IQ. So if he just is focused and plays hard, it's kind of impossible for him to have a bad game because of all the little things he can do that don't really rely on variance, right? He just had to lock in and do his job. And so he starts playing hard. All of a sudden, he starts to feel better about himself. He's almost playing angry right now. And even though the box score production hasn't been that good since he's come back, he's been awesome. His box score numbers in the last 3 games are more or less the same as they were in the stretch before, but he is so much more engaged on defense, so much more engaged on the glass, so much more focused and making better decisions on the offensive end of the floor. LeBron has been really good. Again, with LeBron, it always goes beyond the box score. You could go back to when he was struggling and it's like, oh, he's still, 23, 8 and 7 or whatever it was that he was averaging. It's all good numbers, right? But like when LeBron's not engaged, it can really be draining on a team. He's been so engaged since he's come back, and it's made a world of difference. One stat to demonstrate this difference. In LeBron's first 22 games this year, he averaged just 1.1 stocks per game. That's steals plus blocks, right? In his last 4 games, he's averaging 3.3 stocks per game. So he's tripled his output on steals and blocks. And again, it even goes well beyond the box score in terms of the efforts that he's making, communicating, the rotations that he's making. I think it's the hardest I've seen LeBron play consistently 3 games in a row in like a mid-season stretch like this in December since the 2021 team. It's one thing to do it opening week. It's one thing to do it right before the playoffs. But LeBron, for the most part in this time of year, is very selective with his effort, and he's playing really hard every night. That has been working. Max Christie, very uneven start to the season. He's been in the starting lineup for 5 games now. He's starting to find his footing on defense. He'd struggled on defense to start the year, and he's shooting 43% from 3 in this 5-game span. He's just being solid in his starting role. Gabe Vincent. Gabe Vincent has always been a rock-solid role player who does his job on both ends of the floor, but he's kind of small. So when he's not hitting shots, he's not good enough on defense to overcome those that issue with him making shots. He's a guy that, like, when he's hitting, and in his last 9 games, he's hitting. In his last 9 games, Gabe is 49% from 3 on 4 attempts. Suddenly, he looks like a very useful role player because he does his job. He's a legitimate two-way player. He just hadn't hit shots the entirety of his Lakers tenure up until this recent stretch. Rui Hachimura, 3 blocks and 22 rebounds in his last 3 games. He's been a huge part in their defensive uptick. He also had a huge tap-out rebound to save Anthony Davis after he missed a couple free throws against Sacramento. Austin Reeves, he was out of the lineup for the last 3 losses in that ugly stretch. Getting him back has been huge. In his 4 games since returning, he's averaging 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists. That's damn near all-star level production. D'Angelo Russell. D'Lo can be an infuriating player sometimes, especially when he's not hitting shots because of all of his shortcomings. In his first 17 games this year, he had 6 3-point attempts per game and only made 28% of them. In his last 10 games, on 6 attempts, he's hitting 42% of them. A lot more of D'Lo's upside is on display. And then AD has massively improved on the defensive end in this stretch by virtue of that scheme change that we talked about and also him just kind of devoting some resources to that end of the floor. In this 5-game stretch, AD is averaging 14.4 rebounds per game with 1.4 steals and 3.6 blocks per game. So again, a bunch of key Lakers are playing better. And as a result of that, it amounts to an influx of talent, and you're going to make yourself look like a better team. 4, LeBron and AD are now primarily directing their energy towards the defensive end. Scoring and efficiency has dipped for both of them, but both of them have been amazing on defense, and the roster is actually more capable of supporting LeBron and AD on the offensive end. So it's actually the smartest way for them to use their resources. Austin and D'Lo are stepping up on the offensive end. They're getting enough buckets to win. We're going to talk about their offense in a minute. Their offense is actually dead last in this span as well. So it's been like a complete and total trade-off. And that's going to take some... That's going to be something that takes some time because, again, like when you go from like not competing on defense to competing on defense, it's going to drain your legs. They've got to condition themselves now to be in a position where they can do that while also having the legs they need to make shots. But that's the exciting part because this team does have the potential to be good on both ends if they get to the point where that's a habit for them. And then number 5, and this is probably the most concerning part for me in terms of how I look forward for the Lakers. The schedule has not been demanding on them in this stretch in terms of wear and tear. That's the big question mark. Like, they've played these 5 games, this 4-1 stretch, over a 16-day span. There's 11 rest days mixed in. As we mentioned earlier, the NBA is an onslaught of good basketball teams over and over and over again in the normal parts of the schedule that don't center around the in-season tournament, right? Like, the schedule stays tough. The Lakers have Detroit tonight. They have the size to make things tough on LeBron and AD. They beat the Lakers earlier this year, if you remember. At Golden State on Christmas Day. That's a road game versus a team that has a lot more perimeter speed than the Lakers. That's a tough matchup for them. Sacramento on Saturday. It's really hard to beat a team 4 times in a row. And again, this is the same team that was 4-0 against the Lakers last year. The Cavs, they beat the shit out of the Lakers earlier this year in Cleveland. Second week of January, they have road games at Houston and at Dallas. So like, this is going to go back to playing every other night against good teams, and this is where it's going to come down to their willingness to hang on to the rope, right? Like, I said when I had my Lakers meltdown a few weeks ago that they would have more good stretches this year. That's all this is. I knew this was going to happen. Even when I was bitching and moaning about that Heat game, I said they will have more good stretches this year. They will have stretches where they beat good teams. This is one of those stretches. But any sort of ambition this team has to make a deep playoff run is contingent on their commitment to the daily process, even when it's not easy, even when you're not playing 5 games in 16 days. It will only get harder as the season progresses, and they need to hang on to the rope for a long time before I have any sort of real belief in this team again. So again, they're on a good stretch, 4-1, defending like crazy, a lot of exciting stuff. But championship teams don't do it for a week and a half or for 2 weeks. They do it month after month after month until they get to April. And by virtue of that process, they are so buttoned up that they are so good with their execution for 2 straight months that they put themselves in a position to win the title. This is not a 2-week journey. There are 4 months, I think, roughly, until the playoffs start. They've got to figure out how to get this into an extended part of their basketball identity. I am skeptical, but a good job over the last couple of weeks.